If you've ever heard the phrase check-in, you probably pictured a street rule, not a federal case file. But in this indictment, prosecutors describe an alleged system where certain people, artists, athletes, hustlers, anyone with money, were expected to make a call before moving around Los Angeles. And that call allegedly came with a price. And that's the first twist. The government isn't painting this as one bad incident or one messy argument. They're describing an enterprise, a crew with roles, rules, and a business model. Not just muscle, but image. Not just fear, but influence. Podcasts, interviews, community programs, stuff that looks clean on camera, mixed with allegations that get very ugly behind the scenes. At the center is Eugene-Henley-Jr., better known as Big-U, described as a rolling 60s OG and the alleged leader of what prosecutors call the Big-U enterprise. They also named Sylvester Robinson, Vay, as an alleged underboss and enforcer, and Mark Martin, Bearclaw, as a trusted lieutenant tied to a custom car shop and the label side of the operation. Now here's what makes people lean in. Prosecutors claim this whole case has two faces. The public face is community, protection, mentorship, keeping the peace. The other face, according to the indictment, is extortion, robberies, fraud, and intimidation, all held together by a reputation that made people think twice before saying no. And before we even get to the money, the indictment anchors the story around a Vegas trip that prosecutors say changed everything. A music studio, a rising artist, a confrontation that started as business and allegedly ended as a fatal night. So the real question isn't just what happened. The question is, why would anyone risk building a whole public brand if the private side could bring federal heat? Because once you see the Vegas timeline, the rest of this case reads like dominoes. Picture this, you're an artist trying to get your moment. You fly to Las Vegas for a studio session connected to a Grammy-winning producer. Your travel and Airbnb are arranged through your label, Uneek-Music. Everything looks like a regular work trip until it doesn't. According to the indictment, in January 2021, Big-U allegedly used influence and reputation to arrange for a Uneek-Music artist, identified as RW, to record at that Las Vegas studio. An employee handled the flight and the Airbnb, so the artist could work for a week, normal on paper. Then prosecutors say the energy shifted. Big-U and Vay allegedly drove from Los Angeles to Las Vegas because they felt the artist wasn't producing, wasting studio time, and showing disrespect to Uneek-Music, and by extension, disrespect to the enterprise. The indictment claims Big-U showed up at the Airbnb around 2 a.m., asking why the artist hadn't been at the studio the day before. A few hours later, the artist records at the studio. So if you're watching at home, you're thinking, okay, tension, pressure, maybe a heated argument. But the indictment frames it as something darker, because what happens next is about control. Prosecutors say that just after midnight, Big-U's phone stopped reporting location, like they were turned off or put into airplane mode, while in the vicinity of the studio. Then, the artist is driven back to the Airbnb. Not long after, around 1:20 a.m., the artist allegedly leaves the Airbnb early, suitcase packed, and gets into the same car. That detail is sneaky important. Early checkout, luggage, one day before a scheduled flight home. It reads like someone leaving in a hurry, but not necessarily by choice. And then, the car heads north of Las Vegas, toward an area near the Apex Regional Landfill, before eventually turning back. That's where prosecutors want you to pause, because from this point on, the story stops sounding like music business and starts sounding like a disappearance. Here's the part that makes the indictment feel like a thriller. Prosecutors don't just describe an outcome, they describe a route. They say Big-U drove north with RW toward the Apex Regional Landfill area. Then, a short time later, they say he drove back south toward Las Vegas. Around 2:15 a.m., prosecutors claim both of Big-U's phones started reporting location again, suggesting they were turned back on or taken out of airplane mode. Minutes later, they say Big-U called Vay, who was still at the studio. Then Big-U returns to the studio and allegedly tells an employee he had gone to the gym. But prosecutors place a brutal contrast right beside that gem explanation. They say R.W. was found outside Las Vegas with multiple gunshot injuries. Imagine the confusion. An artist on a work trip, a flight home scheduled, and suddenly the whole story ends in silence. Even if you strip away every dramatic word, that sequencing hits hard. A suitcase, a late-night drive, phones go dark, phones come back, a call back to the studio, a casual explanation, and then the discovery. And that's why this Vegas incident becomes the backbone of the whole indictment. Because prosecutors aren't treating it like a random tragedy. They treat it as an alleged racketeering act connected to a bigger system. They even include a special sentencing allegation that, under Nevada law, the fatal act was intentional and premeditated. Language that raises the stakes far beyond a situation got out of hand. Now here's the retention switch. The indictment claims the story didn't end with that night. It claims the next chapter was about damage control, who talked, what was removed, and how people were allegedly told to move. Because in the government's telling, Las Vegas wasn't only a scene, it was a liability, and liabilities get managed. If you've ever wondered how federal cases get built, this part of the indictment shows the blueprint. Prosecutors lean hard on alleged post-incident behavior, calls, texts, and instructions that sound like people trying to keep a story from spreading. They claim Big-U contacted the studio's owner, the producer, and warned him that detectives would be interviewing him about R.W. Then the next day, prosecutors say Big-U demanded the producer and employees leave the studio. Then comes one of the loudest allegations. Prosecutors say an associate and others removed portions of the studio security system, including video and data from the time period when the key people were at the studio. After that, they cite moves that look like people checking for cameras and controlling who speaks. They allege the Airbnb owner was asked about cameras, and they allege someone connected to the booking was told not to speak with law enforcement. And the indictment claims the worry didn't fade with time. It points to later intercepted calls where Big-U allegedly warned people to be careful discussing the case and to use encrypted apps for certain conversations. Now let's be clear, an indictment is allegations, not a verdict. But from a storytelling perspective, this is where the audience realizes the case isn't built on gossip alone. It's built on what prosecutors say they captured: conversations, location data, and alleged coordination. And while the Vegas storyline is the emotional anchor, the indictment pivots to what the government says was the enterprise's real engine: money through fear. Because prosecutors claim that while the public saw community leadership, behind closed doors, there was an alleged tax on people. Pay up or get taught a lesson. And the lesson they describe starts at a dispensary with a victim who stopped answering calls. This is the chapter that makes people sit up, because it's not about a courtroom theory. It's about an alleged method. Prosecutors describe a victim one, a music and club promoter who partnered with an unlicensed marijuana dispensary in Los Angeles. They claim Big-U extorted victim one for years, up to $25,000 a month, until victim one started ignoring the calls. Then the indictment says the message got delivered the old school way. Prosecutors claim they, Loose Cannon, and about 9 others went to the dispensary and committed a robbery. They allege products, cash, and personal items were taken from people inside, including victim one. Here's where it turns into psychological warfare. Prosecutors say shortly after, Big-U invited victim one to his home, where the alleged robbers were present, and some of the stolen items were displayed like trophies. Then the indictment claims Big-U told victim one a line that sounds designed to live in your head: "That's how you rob yourself." After that, prosecutors say Big-U returned part of what was taken and told victim one he would need to pay $10,000 to prevent future robberies. And it didn't stop there. They allege Big-U directed victim one to identify other marijuana businesses that could be hit next, offering victim one a cut if he helped choose targets. If you're watching, that's a gut punch. allegedly turning a victim into a recruiter, making the victim participate in the very thing that scared him. And prosecutors claim this wasn't isolated. They cite intercepted calls about robbery proceeds and a longer series of alleged extortion attempts laid out like a calendar. But here comes the mid-video turn, because the indictment claims the same operation that allegedly used fear to take money also used helping the community to attract money. And that's where the nonprofit story enters the chat. This is the twist that makes the case feel bigger than street politics, because now prosecutors are talking about city grants and celebrity-sized donations. They describe developing options, a 501c3 nonprofit, portrayed publicly as anti-gang and youth-focused, connected to programs like youth football. The indictment says the city of Los Angeles awarded Developing Options an annual $550,000 grant through the GRYD program, and that from 2018 to 2023. The nonprofit was allotted $2,352,000 in funding. Then prosecutors make their claim that Big-U used Developing Options and other nonprofit branding to solicit donations in support. But that significant portions were allegedly diverted for personal use. They cite examples that sound like headline fuel. A $20,000 wire from an NBA All-Star that prosecutors say was moved to Big-U's personal account almost immediately. A $24,000 donation meant for football equipment with $14,000 allegedly transferred out. A $19,000 donation tied to a content company connected to his podcast with $15,000 allegedly transferred out. A $10,000 donation intended for a meal program allegedly transferred out. A $20,000 donation from a former NBA MVP with $13,000 allegedly moved to personal use. A $100,000 donation from a production company with $36,400 allegedly transferred out. And a $50,000 donor-advised fund donation meant for program costs with $32,500 allegedly transferred out. Prosecutors estimate the donor fraud at roughly $166,900 or more. This is where comments explode. Some viewers will say, that's overhead. Others will say, that's taking community money. And the indictment wants the jury to see it as the second one. But the government doesn't stop at donations. They also allege misuse and misapplication of federally funded grant money, turning a community program into a money stream. And once this nonprofit angle lands, the case feels like it has no ceiling. Because then prosecutors slide in the next category, pandemic relief money. And when the word SBA enters the story, the paper trail gets loud. Here's where prosecutors widen the case from force to forms, because they allege fraud not only in the streets, but on official applications. First, pandemic relief. Prosecutors say Big-U submitted an EIDL application for Uneek-Music, claiming 2019 revenue and costs that they say were false. Then they claim the SBA issued roughly $90,000 minus a fee, plus an additional $10,000, about $100,000 total, into Uneek-Music's account based on that application. Then prosecutors say he submitted another EIDL application for Celebrity Socks, doing business as Uneek Socks, and falsely certified the business was not engaged in illegal activity. They claim the SBA disbursed a $6,000 advance. And if viewers think that's the end of the paperwork angle, the indictment adds mortgage fraud. It describes a residential loan application seeking an $829,694 mortgage. Prosecutors claim the applicant's income was artificially inflated, with a plan that it would be reduced after the loan was obtained. They name a licensed loan officer and allege Big-U and Bear Claw were involved in supporting the inflated income numbers. And then comes a curveball. Prosecutors also include a count tied to interstate transportation for commercial sex activity. They claim Big-U sent Zelle money for a rental car to move women from Los Angeles to Las Vegas and receive photos by text. Later calls cited in the indictment describe him stressed that investigators spoke to the driver and questioning whether those payments could be charged. Then there's a darker control section. Prosecutors cite intercepted calls where Big U allegedly boasted about violence, threatened people during disputes, and used intimidation to keep the enterprise's reputation strong. They even include an allegation that in 2022, he arranged for someone to collect an illegal debt from a current NBA All-Star player that allegedly totaled $3 million, taking a fee for collecting it. Again, allegations, not proven facts. But from a viewer's perspective, it reinforces the theme: access, money, and leverage. And now you're probably noticing the pattern. Whenever pressure builds, prosecutors say the response is either intimidation or movement. So what happened when the investigation started closing in? That's when the indictment says the phones went quiet again, and Big U's public messaging suddenly got very loud. This final stretch is where the indictment turns into a chase scene without a single car crash. Prosecutors allege that in the early morning hours of March 19, 2025, Big U's partner left her phone on at their home, still reporting location. But Big U's phones stopped reporting location data. Then, they allege that before leaving, Big U left a subpoena connected to the investigation out in the open, almost like a signal that he knew the walls were closing in. Then comes the public move. Prosecutors claim Big U posted to a Crenshaw Cougars Instagram account, alleging racial profiling and blaming co-defendants and opponents for the charges. They also claim he posted again naming people and attempting to pressure or dissuade cooperation, using identity language to shame anyone associating with certain individuals. That's not just drama. That's prosecutors framing it as attempted jury pool poisoning and intimidation. Later that same day, the indictment says Big U surrendered to the U.S. Marshal Service without the phones that had stopped reporting location. And then the case stacks the charges like a mountain. A RICO conspiracy at the top, with underlying allegations ranging from robbery and extortion to wire fraud, misuse of federal program funds, bank fraud, and tax-related counts. The indictment also tacks on tax-related allegations, claiming underreporting income for 2019 and failures to file for later years, along with a forfeiture section that signals the government may pursue assets it says were tied to the alleged scheme. So here's the comment section question that matters. If prosecutors are right, was this a protection brand or a business model that used fear and community optics like two sides of the same coin? And the biggest open question now is what happens next? Who flips? What evidence actually gets shown in court? And whether the government can prove this was a coordinated enterprise, not separate incidents stitched together. Drop your thoughts. Does the check-in culture protect people or set them up? And if you followed this story, what's the one detail you think the public still doesn't understand? If you want the next chapter when it drops, subscribe.